Hey everyone, welcome back to Tallulah Talks. That is me. Apologies for the bird in the background. I unfortunately can't do anything about that. Today it is Saturday, which means it's time for Saturday's Haunting Hour, and we are going to be discussing the haunting of the Hermann family. Now, these events did actually inspire the cult classic The Poltergeist. I've never seen The Poltergeist, but from what I understand, it's a family who are terrorised by a ghost. And isn't the little girl like sucked into the TV or some? I don't know. I've never seen it, but this is like the inspiration for that movie. And when I tell you, like, this family had to go through so much, and it only took place for like a month, like, it was crazy. So let's get started with our book of stories. So, February 3rd, I believe it was, 1958, the Hermann family were experiencing very strange occurrences in their home in Long Island. These were pretty inexplicable, but later on, they do get a bunch of experts in to try and see if they can see what the problem is. So these strange events happened to the Hermann family, and they were all attributed to what they believe to be a poltergeist, and they nicknamed this poltergeist Pauper, and you will find out why. So the poltergeist first made itself known on February 3rd about 3:30 p.m. And in the suburb of Long Island was where the family lived. It was a white and green ranch style home and was built in 1953 and was pretty much the same as every other home in that neighbourhood. It was a typical home in a conservative neighbourhood, and it was the last place where you would expect anything to happen, especially since the home had only been built for about 5 years. On February 3rd, it was a clear and cold day, and Lucille Hermann, the mother, had welcomed her children home from school. The children were Lucille Jr., who was 13, and James, who was 12. And soon after the children had come home, these kind of weird things started happening. There were various full bottles in different rooms that suddenly began popping, and these were like screw lids, and they had been popping off and shot across the room. No one saw this event, but the whole family did hear all the lids pop off, and the contents within the bottles just spewed everywhere. And this was one of the poltergeist's favourite things to do, and it especially did this a lot to the family's bottles of holy water. So they were obviously quite a religious family, especially living in a conservative neighbourhood. It was later discovered that a bottle of bleach had opened in the basement, in the utility room of the basement, and the bottle of liquid starch in the kitchen and bottles in the bathroom of shampoo and medicine and holy water had, all these lids had popped off and had spilled everywhere. These bottles had been twisted on with like screw tops, so it was kind of impossible for them to pop off. Mrs. Hermann was then quite worried, quite scared, because she didn't know what was happening, and she called up her husband, James, who worked for an airport. James was very confused by these events. However, he decided that because no one was hurt and it wasn't really, you didn't have to get to it too quickly, he decided to stay at work. And he then took a train home at his usual time of getting home, which was around 7 p.m. He believed there was some kind of like chemical reaction which was causing these bottle tops to pop off. He investigated when he was home and was completely baffled when he did learn that these lids were like screw tops. On the Thursday, at around the same time, so the children had come home from school, the same thing happened. Nail polish, bleach, starch, and more holy water, the lids had popped off and the contents were spilled everywhere. So just an exact repeat of the day before. Another incident happened on Friday night, and James, the father, suspected he knew who it was. He actually suspected it was his young son, who was also called James, but they called him Jimmy. He concluded that since his son had a love for science, he had rigged these bottles to pop in order to scare his family. So kind of just like a practical joke. He suspected that he had done and timed this for when the young boy returned from school. So Hermann spent this entire weekend secretly watching his son, determined to catch him in the act. On the Sunday morning, February 9th, several bottle caps had popped off, leaving containers rocking back and forth by themselves. Hermann had kept a close eye on his son that whole weekend, so he couldn't fathom how his son could have done this when he had been watching him the whole weekend. So he was very angry at this because he hadn't caught his son this time, and he burst into the bathroom and accused Jimmy of rigging all the bottles. And Jimmy protested his innocence, and actually at the same time, as kind of as if whatever was doing this, kind of as if haha, I'm going to do it right in front of you. He then saw a bottle of medicine move by itself from the sink and into the bowl. And then later, a bottle of shampoo also slid across the sink and fell to the floor. It moved completely by itself. So, still being a bit skeptical, Hermann searched the room for hidden wires and found nothing, and realised that these things couldn't be explained. He did call the Nassau County Police. I don't know what he expected them to do. Maybe he just thought it was someone playing a practical joke, someone outside of the family. But he spent several minutes trying to explain to the police what was happening and trying to get them to believe him. He was then put through to Lieutenant Richardson, who actually accused Hermann of playing a practical joke. However, the detective was swayed by kind of the sort of tone of Hermann's voice. And it also actually helped that Hermann had a very good reputation within his community. So within minutes, they sent someone to investigate, and that was Officer James Hughes. And again, he was also skeptical. However, within minutes of being in the house, his mind was immediately changed when he saw several bottles pop open and fire directly in his direction. So whatever it was, obviously wasn't happy at him being there. Detective Joseph Tosey then got involved and was assigned to the Hermann case, and he had read Hughes' report and concluded that they were just imagining it. It might have been, there might have been on something. On February 11th, Detective Tosey began observing the house, and the same night that he had started his observation, a perfume bottle overturned by itself and spilled its remains in the daughter's bedroom. No one was in the room at the time, and disturbances were also very centred around the holy water that the family kept within the house. On many occasions, the bottle lid of the holy water would pop off, and on one of these occasions, Hermann went to investigate and found the bottle on the floor and found it was warm to the touch, which was very odd. On February 15th, Hermann's children were watching TV. Their cousin Marie Martha was babysitting at this time, and they all saw a porcelain figurine on the table kind of wiggled about and just immediately shot into the air, and it made a very loud crashing sound as it landed on the floor. However, the children and Marie were very kind of baffled because it was still intact. It wasn't broken or anything. After this incident, Hermann decided to go down another route, and he decided to contact Father William MacLeod of the Church of St. William for help. Father MacLeod came by the house and sprinkled holy water in each room. However, this didn't actually help much, and I think it actually made things worse. The poltergeist kind of decided it didn't want to leave, and during this time, the news of these strange occurrences has kind of got out, and news and media outlets then kind of fled to this home and was really wanting to interview the family. And I believe they actually caught some of the occurrences on television. The story received a lot of publicity, and the house was constantly surrounded by news, media, photographers wanting to kind of get in on the scoop. The Hermanns received numerous phone calls. However, they did stay patient during this time and took a lot of advice from a lot of the callers. They also allowed a physicist to come to the home to see if he could perhaps give an explanation, and this was Robert Zicker. He brought dowsing rods into the home and went over the house with them, and once he had finished, he stated that he believed there were underground streams below the house that was causing this strange phenomenon to occur. I'm not sure what dowsing rods are, I'll have to look that up. It was believed that the water may be creating a magnetic field, and this was why the strange occurrences were happening. So Detective Tozy decided to examine this idea. However, the geological survey had suggested that this information was completely wrong, and so they were back to square one. At one point, while the detective was in the Hermanns' basement, a bronze horse statue weighing about 100 pounds had flew across the room and actually hit the detective. I'm not sure where about it hit him, but it did hit him. The family kind of went through all of these possible explanations of what was going on around the house. They ruled out the Air Force and their flight plans. They ruled out radio waves and found that the building was actually structurally sound. So they were kind of going through all avenues to find out what could explain these occurrences, and everywhere was just a dead end. There was a letter that came to the family from a woman named Helen Connolly, and she had experienced the same type of thing where her furniture was flying and moving on its own. And she actually discovered that she had a downdraft coming from her fireplace, and as soon as she had put a metal rotary turbine, the furniture stopped moving. And so the Hermanns tried this. Mr. Hermann took this advice and did the same thing. However, once this was installed, a porcelain figurine launched across the room and smashed on a desk. It flew around 12 foot in the air and left a dent in the wood of the table. And this was actually broadcasted to TV audiences as well. So I don't know if he had allowed people to come in and film this, but this is what had happened. On February 20th, things got even more violent and another figurine smashed against the desk. A bottle of ink had popped its cap and flew through the air, smashing its contents all up the wall. A sugar bowl flew off the table while Detective Tozy was there, and it actually nearly hit Jimmy, but it wasn't near him enough to hit him. And it seems a lot of this activity centered around Jimmy. A lot of things happened in his room, when he came home from school, just when he was around in general. That night, the family spent the night with a relative, and Tozy stayed in the house. However, there were no more incidents that occurred that night. When the family returned the next morning, however, a sugar bowl flew from the table and shattered. So it seemed to be more active when the family was in the house. On February 24th, Detective Tozy started to hear the sound of footsteps and loud noises coming from Jimmy's room. However, no one was in there. There was a large bookcase that had fallen face down to the floor. And the next night, as Jimmy was doing his homework, a record player lifted and flew across the room. A small statue of the Virgin Mary flew 12 foot and hit a mirror frame in the master bedroom. And a heavy glass centerpiece in the dining room flew up and hit a cupboard, chipping a piece off of this cupboard before falling to the floor. And the family were witness to this. A world globe shot down the hall from Jimmy's room, and it just missed hitting Detective Tozy. So it seemed whatever was going on, it did not like the detective. A newspaper photographer, John Gold, also witnessed his flash bulbs for his camera lift off a table and fly through the air, striking a wall. So it was quite violent, these occurrences. The poltergeist at this point had also begun knocking on walls to get attention. However, no communication was even attempted with this thing. Researchers at Duke University suggested that an adolescent child, usually a girl, could possibly be capable of psychokinesis, and they had asked the family to come and test this theory. In this case, Jimmy was always around for kind of 75% of the occurrences, so it could maybe possibly be him without even realising it. So Dr. Pratt, one of the researchers, was welcomed to the home and had come to observe and spend time talking to Jimmy because most of the activity happened around him. However, during this time, there was no sign of the poltergeist. It was like it didn't want to perform. March 2nd, the poltergeist did return, and a dish was thrown from the kitchen cabinet and shattered on the floor. A table was tipped over in Jimmy's room, and 2 days later, a bowl of flowers slid down the table and flew into the air and smashed. And the last occurrence actually happened on the 10th of March. Mrs. Hermann and the children were getting ready for bed, and they heard a very loud sound come from the cellar. So one of the researchers had gone down and actually found a bottle of bleach sitting in a box, and it had lost its plastic lid. And like I said, this was the very last act from the poltergeist. They had 67 recorded disturbances between February 3rd and March 10th. And that was the end of the disturbances. We're not sure, it's never explained why these disturbances began in the first place, because I think the Hermanns had been living there for quite a while. And then all of a sudden on March 10th, they just suddenly stopped. And it might be that the family never actually tried to communicate with the poltergeist, and that's why it stopped. It maybe got bored. But like I said, the houses were relatively new at that point, so no one had like died in or around the area at that time. And it must have been a really scary time for the family. And I mean, they persevered and they stayed in that house. I mean, I would have been gone a long time ago. But yeah, I found that really interesting. So, yeah, and that is the today's story. That's the end of today's story. Let me know what you think, and also let me know what cases you would like me to look into for my Saturday videos. And definitely hit that subscribe button if this is the kind of content